wish the light were on you as much as it's on me right now, because I suspect that many of you have had experiences far more interesting and significant than I've had. Just as a point, my battalion, I was the intelligence officer of the 2nd of the 12th Cav, out of the 1st Air Cav Division. We were sent to relieve the Marines in Way, and it took us, we were supposed to get there in a day and join up with them, and it actually took us a month. We didn't know it, but when we started moving toward Way, we accidentally ran into the headquarters of the front commanding the occupation of the city, defended by 3 battalions. And we were ordered to attack those 3 battalions, dug in without air or artillery support. And that was quite an adventure, to say the least. I've written about that in a book called The Lost Battalion of Tet, so I won't repeat that. I'd like to give you some of my observations on what happened during Tet, its significance then and its significance today. Some of what I'm saying I know is going to be a little controversial, but please accept the fact that I'm trying to give you my perspective on it, and I'm not giving you the ultimate historical perspective. Memories of my time during the Tet Offensive are one thing, but that just has to do with what took place within my own sight and hearing, which is really a pretty narrow piece of geography. But having been involved in the Tet Offensive, I've really tried very hard to think about what the significance of it was. So here it is 41 years later, and I'm still thinking different and new things about the significance of the Tet Offensive and to a lesser extent my own role in it. If you want to think of the first significant event of the Vietnam War, what was it? And I think that was, at least for the purposes of this discussion, it was the Igraine campaign in November of 1965, which resulted in a very, very well-received book, We Were Soldiers Once and Young, by Hal Moore and Joe Galloway, and you'll see them later in this conference, I understand. And why was that such a huge event? And basically, it had to do with the magnitude of the casualties, the sacrifice, and then stories about the unit cohesion of how well basically 3 battalions survived at X-Ray and Albany. But when you really think about it, looking back now many years, what was the significance of the Igraine campaign? And I think that there was very little strategic significance to it. At the time, it was touted as saying the U.S. Army, U.S. Armed Forces could stand up and fight and win over the North Vietnamese with large combat formations. The casualties, of course, on both sides were rather horrendous. But at the time, it certainly generated support for the whole body count syndrome, that if we killed more of them than they killed of us, ultimately they'd be forced to cry uncle. And of course that didn't work. We underestimated their ability to stand sustained punishment. We didn't appreciate that the North Vietnamese were frankly able to sustain support for the war in North Vietnam and with their regular forces, Viet Cong forces in the South. And we didn't realize that for many, many years, as late as, I suppose, 1970, up until 1975, when Saigon finally collapsed. And the North Vietnamese were able to keep their cohesion and their combat power together despite very, very heavy losses and damage to their country. So what we learned there is what we should have known, I think, beforehand, is that there are some causes, good or bad, that generate so much cohesion that you just can't wish away the threat. During Tet of 1968, our casualties weren't very high, relatively speaking. and I don't mean to denigrate the sacrifices of those who made great sacrifices in terms of death or dismemberment or other sacrifices, physical or mental. But the cost to us during the Tet Offensive in terms of military expenditure was not very great. And yet the strategic significance of the Tet Offensive is obviously very, very significant because it undermined support for the war here at home among much of our population. The odd thing is that militarily, Tet was a success for us. There was no general uprising as the North Vietnamese expected. They were quickly booted out of Saigon. They failed to succeed in their attacks on provincial capitals and district capitals and so on. The only great success they had was in Hue, where much to their own surprise they were able to hold on to the city for nearly a month. But that was painted as a great defeat for us because at the time we were broadcasting the military from Saigon that the war was going well, light at the end of the tunnel. Our programs training the Vietnamese were working very well. And so when the North Vietnamese attacked, seized, and held Hue for about a month, that was considered exposing what we had been talking about publicly as misleading. And that was very depressing to many people here at home, especially I see many faces here my age or maybe even older that remember the famous broadcast from the top of the building in Hue by Walter Cronkite, where he basically said that the war is now lost, and many people followed him there. So I guess my point is, strategically, I think that the Hue campaign was probably at least one of the most significant events of the Vietnam War. And what you saw there, you hear the word surge now. Our surge in Baghdad and Iraq as having reversed the tide of the war. Well, in fact, if you look upon the Vietnamese initiation of the Tet Offensive, that was their version of the surge, where they put utmost effort into it. And while they failed militarily, they succeeded strategically. So I leave it to you individually to make a decision whether or not the surge was successful from their point of view. Another lesson learned, we thought that the Vietnam War would be over in short order, that they were just little people in black pajamas that we could easily crush with our superior firepower, our technology, and the courage and bravery of our armed forces. And I would argue that we made a similar estimation when we attacked Iraq, that the thought was that when we seized Baghdad, the war would be over with and the resolve, our enemies would be defeated and we could start rebuilding the country in a state of peace and tranquility and support. And so I think, generally speaking, that we have a tendency in this country to underestimate the resolve or the power of our enemies, and we try and see them in our own image. And I would hope that in the future, especially when you younger people come of age, whether you're involved in the military directly or not, that we work hard to make an honest assessment of those that we decide to wage war against, because war, the enemy gets a vote, and war is a terrible thing, and you shouldn't go into it lightly, but to win, and to win a war against a determined, courageous ally or enemy sometimes takes more effort than we'd like to think in the first instance.